Would you believe an HOA president could be so heartless as to cut a disabled war hero's oxygen line in the dead of night, thinking no one would fight back? That's exactly what happened in our quiet suburban cul-de-sac, and let me tell you, it sparked a war nobody saw coming. It was 2:47 a.m. when the shrill alarm from Uncle Jim's oxygen tank ripped me out of sleep. My heart pounded as I bolted barefoot across the cold pavement to the RV park beside our house. Through the fogged-up window, I saw him slumped in his chair, hands clawing at the tube by his nose, his eyes wide with panic. The smell of burnt plastic hit me as I yanked the door open. His lips were turning blue, the tank gauge pinned at 0. I slammed the backup valve on, praying it'd hold. It did just barely. Jim gasped, pulling in air like he'd been drowning. As paramedics swarmed in minutes later, I pulled up the security footage from the camera I'd rigged last week after some weird incidents. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen, our HOA president, in black gloves, scissors glinting under the streetlight, slicing Jim's oxygen line with a smug grin like she was cutting a grand opening ribbon. This wasn't just petty HOA nonsense. This was attempted murder. I'd moved back to my childhood home to care for Uncle Jim, a Vietnam vet and retired Green Beret medic who'd earned a Purple Heart dragging soldiers out of hellfire. A stroke left him partially paralyzed, but he was still a man of steel, with stories that could hush a room. He loved his independence, which is why he lived in his modified RV, parked legally beside our house with every permit and ADA exemption filed to the letter. But none of that mattered to Karen, the self-appointed dictator of our street. Neighbors warned me about her before I'd even unpacked my boxes. She fined me for a too colorful mailbox. One grumbled, handing me a stale cookie. Another whispered, "She measures lawns with a tape measure." They weren't exaggerating. By day 2, we got a citation for excessive flagpole use, because Jim flew his military Service flag next to the American one. Karen's reign of terror started there but didn't stop. She showed up one gray afternoon, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on despite the clouds, and stared right at Jim in his wheelchair by the RV ramp. "This vehicle violates community standards," she snapped, ignoring me. "Remove it in 72 hours. Jim, cool as ever, just nodded. "Talk to the city. They've got the paperwork. Maybe brush up on the ADA too." She scoffed, spinning on her heel. "Rules are rules," she muttered. "Don't expect special treatment just because of some old uniform." Uniform. That's what she called the metals and shadow box by Jim's window, the one he'd worn SAVYing lives under gunfire. The citations kept coming wrong: porch light color, an unauthorized eagle statue, my car supposedly parked 2 inches off in our own driveway. Karen even sent someone to measure the RV ramp's distance from the sidewalk. Jim never blinked, just read his newspaper while his oxygen tank hissed softly. But then came the first real warning. One morning, I found the RV's window pried open, the oxygen dial tampered with. Jim swore he hadn't touched it. We added a lock and a cheap camera taped to the gutter. That camera caught the moment that changed everything. I'd crashed early that night after refilling Jim's tank. The alarm woke me, and after the paramedics got him stable, I checked the footage. At 2:41 a.m., a figure in a hoodie crept up our side yard, dodging the motion sensor. As they neared the RV, a security light lit up their face. Karen, her sharp jaw and over-tweezed brows unmistakable. She pulled scissors from her coat, knelt, and snipped the oxygen line with eerie calm, then walked off, smirking like she just finished a chore. I sat there, disbelief turning to fury. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. The next morning, I marched to the HOA office, phone in hand, ready to show the board. Karen was on a wellness retreat, her jittery assistant claimed. I laughed, bitter, and left. She didn't care about rules, she cared about control. She thought she could bully a disabled vet and his nephew, still surrounded by MOVYing boxes. She didn't know Jim had medals, news clippings, and old military buddies, or that I, a former journalist with a knack for social media, was ready to fight dirty. That night, I edited the footage with subtitles, letting the video speak for itself, and posted it with one line. This is HOA abuse. By morning, it had 70,000 views. By noon, reporters were calling. By evening, a veterans' rights group offered legal help and a PR push. Karen had no clue the storm she'd kicked up, but I did. I was going to make sure the world saw what she'd done, not just because she nearly killed Jim, but because letting her win could doom someone without a backup tank or a camera. The day after the video blew up, Jim sat in the RV, sipping coffee through a metal straw, his oxygen humming steady. Despite the chaos, he looked calm, probably because he'd faced worse in war zones. News vans rolled in by 10 a.m. first local, then bigger networks. They wanted interviews, footage, everything. I tried to keep Jim out of it, but he surprised me, asking for his army jacket and shined boots. "Let's give him a show, kid," he said with a grin. The interview happened on our front lawn, the same one Karen fined for a non-compliant flower pot. A reporter asked if the attack felt personal. Jim chuckled, leaning forward. "I've been shot at, bombed, and hunted by folks who didn't know me. At least they were upfront enemies." Karen smiled at me while planning to choke my air away. "That's a different kind of EVYL." That quote went viral before the segment aired, spreading across the internet with support from veterans, nurses, and HOA victims nationwide. The video hit 1 million views, then 2. Karen's face, caught mid-snip, became a meme. "This oxygen line ruins the VYB," one caption read. Neighbors split, some brought casseroles and apologies, others doubled down, claiming the footage was faked. A Marine vet left a note under our mat. "Respect, sir." Karen vanished, her house dark, her usual power walks and clipboard crusades gone. The HOA put out a weak statement claiming the video was altered, and Karen was inspecting a hazard. It backfired, pissing off the community even more. Jim's old squadmate, Mike, a retired JAG lawyer, flew in, hugged Jim, and said, "We've got a new mission. We filed lawsuits for reckless endangerment, ADA violations, and HOA harassment, targeting Karen and the board that propped her up." I kept the pressure on, hosting a live Q&A with Jim on a veterans podcast. He shared how he earned his Purple Heart pulling teammates from a burning truck in Cambodia, his voice steady but heavy. When asked how it felt to be betrayed at home, he said, "It's the first time I felt stabbed on my own soil." The chat blew up, donations rolled in, even politicians reached out. Karen sent a cease and desist letter, claiming defamation and demanding we pull the video and apologize. Mike laughed, calling it delusional, and we fired back with medical records and the footage. The neighborhood was a powder keg. One HOA board member, Lisa, showed up with a pie, whispering, "I didn't know she'd actually cut it. Don't sue me." She quit the next day, posting an apology online. The story became a national scandal, even landing in a late-night comedian's monologue. In Florida, an HOA queen tried to snuff out a vet's oxygen. Now she's the one gasping. Jim didn't laugh, but he smirked. We were winning not with threats, but with truth. 3 days later, a federal mediator, DVYD Reed, showed up from the Department of Housing, sent after our video reached advocacy groups. He toured the property, checked permits, and started building a CIVYL rights case. Meanwhile, Karen resurfaced, calling an emergency HOA meeting to push new rules banning VY-cyble medical equipment and overnight RV parking. The community lost it. Elderly folks with oxygen tanks, parents of sick kids they saw they'd be next. A dad whose son used a stairlift taped an open letter to every mailbox. "If my boy's life support is non-compliant, this board's got no heart." Karen doubled down, hiring armed security to slap citations on people, including a cancer patient for a backup generator. A mom's video screaming at a guard tipped the scales further. I stayed up all night on a new video, interviewing a widow with COPD, a dad whose daughter needed a ventilator, a guy with an 4 drip all targeted by Karen's rules. It hit 6 million VYUs, sparking hashtags like the HOA. A former board member, Sarah, leaked emails and audio of Karen mocking disabled residents, saying, "They'll cry disability until someone reminds them this is my neighborhood." That audio aired on the evening news, flipping public opinion. Karen's responsia staged VY Deo claiming she was the VY Tim of a smear campaign tanked, downvoted into Obli VY on. Her silence on the oxygen line spoke louder than any excuse. At the next HOA meeting, I showed enhanced footage, crystal clear, of Karen cutting the line. The room went dead quiet, her presence wilting under the EVY denke. She stormed out, no longer strutting. The local paper's headline screamed, "HOA leader faces backlash over veterans' oxygen sabotage." A veterans group demanded criminal charges, and the HOA suspended Karen pending legal action. In court, Mike laid out the case like a surgeon footage, VA records, ADA exemptions. Jim took the stand, his Ser VYCE pins gleaming, recounting the incident with quiet pain. When Karen's lawyer suggested she was confused about the hose, Jim fired back. "If you're confused about an oxygen line, you shouldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a neighborhood." The room laughed, tension breaking. Neighbors testified about Karen's discriminatory rules, painting her as a tyrant. On day 4, the judge ruled Karen and the HOA liable for emotional distress, ADA violations, reckless endangerment, and harassment. Damages were awarded, the HOA ordered to restructure, and Karen was fined, barred from leadership, and referred for criminal charges. The courtroom cheered, but Jim stayed calm. Outside, he told reporters, "This isn't revenge. It's about breath, about dignity. Take someone's air and expect silence. You're not facing a neighborhood, you're facing a nation that doesn't forget." That quote echoed online, fueling fundraisers and policy talks. Karen disappeared. Her once perfect lawn grew wild, a silent monument to her fall. The HOA, under new leadership, apologized and drafted inclusive rules. A community barbecue for a veterans shelter drew hundreds, laughter replacing fear. The RV stood proud, flag untouched. Kids biked by, neighbors waved, strangers shook Jim's hand. Months later, he sat on the porch, coffee in hand, staring at the yard. I asked if he thought we'd make it through. He tapped his oxygen tank and grinned. "Bullies think silence is consent, but make enough noise, and the world listens. Sometimes one good breath blows their whole house of cards down." Peace returned, hard-won and fiercely of VY Tory, not just for us, but for every underdog who refuses to choke quietly.